Hi there. I'm just a little cat trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It's free. Just click subscribe right under this video. It would mean the world to me.
At Thanksgiving, my sister rolled her eyes and said, "You still live in that tiny apartment, right?" I didn't flinch, didn't snap, didn't give her the reaction she clearly wanted. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a small, glossy red gift bag with black tissue paper, and slid it across the table toward her like it was nothing more than a hostess gift. Everyone at the table paused, forks suspended midair, wine glasses halfway to lips. I smiled, took a sip of my cranberry spritzer, and said casually, "Not anymore." It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. And honestly, if it hadn't been for what I had planned, I might have just let it slide like I always did. But this year, things were different, very different. Let me back up for a second. My name's Rachel. I'm 42, divorced, no kids, and I work as a shift supervisor at a logistics warehouse. Glamorous, I know. I also pick up shifts at a local bakery on weekends, mostly for the extra cash and partly to avoid being home alone on Sundays. After my ex-husband Caleb left me 4 years ago for a girl who wore Doc Martens and made TikToks about mental health, things kind of fell apart. We'd sold the house in the divorce, and after the dust settled, I had just enough to rent a 1-bedroom apartment above a Vietnamese nail salon in a part of town that was up and coming, if you believe the real estate blogs, which I didn't. I had a leaky bathroom ceiling, no dishwasher, and my upstairs neighbor apparently tap danced at midnight. But it was mine, and I made it work. Still, every family gathering felt like a monthly subscription to passive aggression. Melissa, my younger sister, was always the golden girl. Married to some finance guy named Dan, lives in a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, drives a leased SUV with heated seats and a backup camera that talks to her. 2 kids, private school, takes the family to Disney every spring break. She's one of those women who always smells like expensive lotion and talks like she's narrating a lifestyle blog. And for the past few years, she's developed a habit of turning everything into a veiled insult. Sometimes so subtle, you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. But I always paid attention. Thanksgiving this year was at my mom's place, just like always. Same plastic turkey centerpiece she's been using since '97. Same stuffing recipe that no one loves, but we all eat because she gets this look if you pass it over. We were about 10 minutes into the meal when Melissa made her move. She was talking about her new kitchen countertops, some kind of marble I can't pronounce, when she turned to me, all bright smile and condescension wrapped in concern, and said, "Rach, how do you even cook anything in that tiny little apartment kitchen of yours? Do you even have an oven?" The table chuckled, my Uncle Mitch gave a snort, but I just nodded, leaned back in my chair, and said, "Actually, funny you mentioned that," and handed her the gift bag. I think she thought it was a joke at first. Melissa pulled the tissue paper out like she was expecting to find a gag candle or some Pinteresty handmade soap. Instead, she pulled out a manila envelope, flipped it open, and froze. Her eyes scanned the top paper. It was the deed. Beneath that, a photo of a small but freshly painted white ranch-style house with navy shutters and a red front door. At the bottom was a set of keys on a keychain shaped like a cardinal, the bird, not the sports team. For a full 10 seconds, you could hear nothing but the dishwasher humming from the other room. My mom leaned forward, squinting. "What's that?" she asked. Melissa didn't respond, not right away. She just kept looking at the address printed on the deed. And then suddenly her face changed. Not just surprised, but something more like confusion than recognition. And finally, something that almost looked like panic. She looked up at me like she was trying to figure out if this was some elaborate prank, some twisted trap she'd walked into, and in that moment, I knew I'd done it. I'd finally shut her up. "You bought a house, Mash?" she asked, her voice shaky but trying to keep that same polished tone. "I did," I said, sipping my drink. "Closed on it last week. Needed a change." "That address," she murmured, trailing off. My mom glanced at it and blinked. "Wait a second. That's out near Millstone. That's not—" Melissa stood up abruptly, the envelope clenched in her hand, her face pale. She didn't say another word. She just walked out of the dining room, out the front door, and into the night, heels clacking on the porch like a countdown. Everyone stared after her. My mom looked at me, completely baffled, and asked, "Rachel, why does she look like she's seen a ghost?" I just shrugged and stabbed another bite of stuffing, and in that moment, I didn't care that my mashed potatoes were cold, or that Melissa had once laughed when my car broke down on the freeway, or that she never called unless it was to show off, because I had finally given her something she couldn't top, spin, or pretend didn't matter. I had taken something back, but I didn't know, yet, just how deep that something really went. The next morning, the sun came through the blinds in my apartment like it always did, too bright, too early, and hitting me straight in the eyes before I was ready for it. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the usual tightness in my chest that greeted me with every sunrise, that nagging reminder of how little I had and how far I still felt from anything that resembled peace. Instead, I sat up in bed, still half in my Thanksgiving outfit, makeup smudged and hair a mess, and I laughed, a real full laugh that startled even me, because after all the years of taking her jabs, after biting my tongue through every smug comment and every sugar-coated insult, I had finally watched my sister walk out of a room, speechless, rattled, and completely out of her well-manicured element. What made it all even better was that she had no idea how long I'd been planning that moment, not in some cinematic, dramatic kind of way, but in a real, tired, grown woman way, the kind that grows slowly in your gut, over years of swallowing bitterness and pretending it didn't taste like poison. Because the truth was, I didn't just stumble into buying that house. That wasn't luck or inheritance or a secret boyfriend who came to the rescue. That house, the little ranch with the red door and the tiny front porch with the cracked step, that house was the product of 2 years of grinding myself down to the bone, of clocking in at the warehouse before the sun came up, changing in my car behind the Dunkin' Donuts, and working the bakery counter until my feet went numb, of skipping dinners, saying no to everything fun, and putting every extra penny into a savings account. I called Someday. Someday started right after my divorce, when Caleb moved out and I was left with the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but wraps itself around your spine and settles in like a second skin. At first, I told myself I was okay with the apartment, with the slow leak in the bathroom and the flickering hallway light, and the way the upstairs neighbor played the same bass-heavy playlist every Saturday night. I told myself it was temporary, transitional, manageable, but deep down, I hated it. Not because it was small or old or noisy, but because I knew that every time Melissa called it cozy with that little smirk, what she meant was pathetic. Then one night, after a particularly long double shift and a crying spell in the car that I refused to admit even happened, I got a text from a coworker named Tracy, who knew I'd been saving. She sent me a blurry photo of a foreclosure listing, said it was through some quiet auction site, not even on the major real estate apps yet. The house was small, clearly a fixer-upper, with peeling paint, a patchy lawn, and a red front door that looked like it had seen better decades. But something about it stuck with me, the shape of the windows, the faded shutters, the way the porch light hung crooked like a tired eye. I clicked on the listing, saw the price, and my heart actually skipped. It was just barely within reach. No mortgage, no loans, just a brutal down payment that would drain everything I had but would make it mine. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the photos, zoomed in on cracks and warped floorboards, imagined what it would look like with curtains and a coat of paint. And in the morning, I drove out there before work just to see it in person. The drive was longer than I wanted, just over an hour outside the city, but the neighborhood was quiet, filled with those middle-aged homes that all look like they came from the same 1970s blueprint. Modest, but cared for. And when I stood in front of that red door, I didn't feel excitement or pride or any of the emotions I thought I would. I just felt calm, like the noise in my head finally shut up for a second. I placed the winning bid 2 days later. When the paperwork came through, I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not my coworkers, and definitely not Melissa. I kept it quiet, made small repairs where I could on weekends. paid a handyman named Carl, under the table to fix the cracked porch step, and painted the door again myself on a rainy Sunday in October. Red, the same red, because it felt right. I didn't move in right away. I needed to get the electrical checked, had to replace the water heater, and I wasn't about to sleep in a house that might still have mice, but I kept the keys on a hook by my bed and looked at them every night like a talisman. It was mine. No one could take that from me. Back at the Thanksgiving table, after Melissa had stormed out, there was this thick silence that settled over everyone like the turkey coma had come early. My mom tried to play it off with some awkward laugh, asking if I'd really bought a house, but when she looked at the address again, her face went pale too. "Isn't that near Millstone?" she asked, blinking hard, her voice uncertain. I nodded. "A little past it, near the old train depot," I replied, still casual. She looked at the envelope again, then at the front door where Melissa had just disappeared through, and then back at me, but said nothing. My Uncle Mitch, who'd been quiet through the whole thing, finally spoke. "Wait, what's the number on that house again?" he asked. I told him. He stared at me like I'd grown another head. And then he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "That used to be someone's place. Someone your sister knew real well." But before I could ask what he meant, my mom called for dessert like nothing had happened. And just like that, the tension broke. Plates were passed, coffee poured, and the conversation drifted elsewhere. But I noticed something strange. Everyone avoided talking about Melissa. No one asked why she left, no one tried to call her, and no one mentioned the house again. It felt like I'd thrown a grenade into the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, but instead of chaos, what followed was a strange kind of hush. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened a door I wasn't entirely prepared to walk through. But it was mine now. Red door and all. 3 days passed without a word from Melissa. And while most people would chalk that up to pride or embarrassment, or maybe even just being busy with the post-holiday chaos of returning gifts and wrangling children into their schedules again, I knew my sister too well to believe she was just giving it time to blow over. Melissa wasn't the type to avoid confrontation because she needed space. If anything, she thrived on subtle wars, waged over family text threads, and backhanded comments slipped into birthday cards. So the silence from her wasn't just loud, it was suspicious. And if I'm being honest, the longer it stretched, the more I started to wonder whether what I had done, what I had handed her at that table, was more than just a show of independence or the satisfaction of shutting her up. Maybe it had touched something else, something I didn't even know was there. I kept going to work like normal, pushing pallets at the warehouse and boxing pastries at the bakery, but I found myself driving out to the new house more and more, even though I hadn't moved in yet. I'd park out front and just sit there in my car, sometimes for an hour, watching the wind blow through the brittle hedges and the neighbors rake their yards. It was a quiet street, one of those forgotten corners of suburbia that felt like it belonged to another decade. There was a bakery 2 blocks down that still had a hand-painted sign, and an old movie theater that only showed second-run films for $5. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed much in the last 20 years and didn't seem to want to. One of those days, I was sweeping leaves off the porch when I saw a familiar car pull up along the curb. Uncle Mitch's beat-up Silverado, the same one he's had since I was in high school, with duct tape on the driver's side mirror and a rifle rack in the back window that he insisted was just for show. He got out slowly, adjusting his cap like it was a signal to stay calm, and walked up to me with that half-limp of his from the army, eyes squinting against the sun as he looked at the house like he was seeing a ghost instead of wood and paint. "I knew it," he muttered, almost to himself. "Didn't believe it when I saw the address in the deed, but here it is." I wiped my hands on my jeans and raised an eyebrow. "You want to explain what that means?" He leaned against the porch railing, which creaked under his weight, and looked out across the street before speaking. "This place used to belong to a guy named Shawn Becker. Your sister dated him back in college. Real intense thing. On again, off again. You probably don't remember." I didn't, but the name didn't sound totally unfamiliar either. I remembered hearing Melissa cry over someone named Shawn once when we were younger. She'd locked herself in the bathroom with a bottle of Arbor Mist and wouldn't come out until my mom promised to drive her to his apartment at 2 in the morning. That was over 20 years ago. He lived here? I asked, trying to imagine it. Melissa on this porch, Shawn in the doorway, maybe yelling, maybe laughing. For a while, Mitch nodded. Inherited it from an aunt, I think. Never did much with it. Melissa was crazy about him, said he was the one, but then he just vanished. Vanished? I repeated, not because I didn't understand the word, but because it didn't make sense the way he said it. Gone. Disappeared. No phone calls, no letters, nothing. Just up and left the house, left town, left everything. Rumor was he was in some kind of trouble, money stuff. Your mom always said Melissa knew more than she let on, but she never talked about it again. Family stopped bringing him up after a while. That sat in my chest like a rock. I looked back at the house, the peeling shutters, the tiny attic window, the red door I'd painted over without knowing who used to walk through it, and something about it started to feel different. Less like a fresh start, and more like a crime scene that had been cleaned just well enough to sell. You're telling me she used to live here? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Not officially, he shrugged. But she was here most weekends, had a key, probably more than that if you know what I mean. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked up the porch steps, unlocked the front door, and motioned for him to follow me in. The living room still smelled like sawdust and paint, but it was coming together. New floors, fresh walls, a cheap secondhand couch I'd hauled in myself. Mitch didn't say anything as he looked around, just took it all in with that military stillness that made you wonder what he wasn't saying. Finally, he pointed at the narrow staircase leading up to the attic and said, "He used to keep all kinds of junk up there. Not sure anyone cleared it out when the bank foreclosed. Might be worth a look." After he left, I climbed the stairs with a flashlight in one hand and a box cutter in the other, not sure what I expected to find. Most of the attic was empty, just insulation, some broken shelves, and a pile of old newspapers tied with twine. But in the corner, behind a piece of plywood leaning against the wall, I found a dusty cardboard box that looked out of place, like it had been shoved there in a hurry. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, some old, some new, all of them featuring Melissa. In some she was smiling, in others crying, and in more than a few, she looked like she didn't know she was being photographed. My stomach dropped. There were letters too, none addressed, but written in blocky handwriting with phrases like, "She'll come back," and "She's mine." I backed away slowly, sat down hard on the attic floor, and tried to breathe. This wasn't just a breakup. This wasn't just a house. Something had happened here, something Melissa never told anyone about. And I had just walked right into it, blind and proud, and thinking I was the one in control. But as I stared at those photos, those desperate scribbles and haunted memories packed into a forgotten box, I realized something else. This house wasn't just the answer to my sister's cruelty. It was also the beginning of a question I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. I sat in that dusty attic for longer than I'd care to admit, cross-legged on a splintered wooden floor with a box of someone else's memories cradled in my lap, while the kind of heavy silence that doesn't belong in a house just recently made mine settled around me like fog creeping through an open window. And for the first time since I'd slid that gift bag across the Thanksgiving table, I didn't feel victorious or clever or even remotely satisfied with what I'd done. Instead, I felt like I had cracked open a door that was never meant to be opened, a door that led somewhere darker than I'd ever imagined. And the air coming through it didn't just feel cold, it felt wrong. There were photos, so many photos, each one painstakingly dated and numbered in blue ink on the back, the handwriting meticulous and unsettling in its precision, as if the person who had taken them, presumably Shawn Becker, the long-lost boyfriend my sister had never spoken of again, had been cataloging not just moments but evidence of something that mattered only to him, something obsessive and private and clearly unresolved. Some of the photos were harmless. Melissa sitting on the hood of a car, smiling with a drink in her hand, Melissa in what looked like a dorm hallway, laughing with friends, Melissa at the edge of some beach I couldn't place. But others were harder to look at, caught in moments too raw or too quiet, like she wasn't aware she was being watched, or worse, had forgotten that she ever could be. Mixed in with the photos were pages of notes, some typed on yellowed printer paper, others scrawled on napkins, receipts, the back of envelopes. One note, written in thick Sharpie on a crumpled grocery list, simply read, "She said forever, I believed her." Another had a more frantic tone. "Nobody understands. She was scared, not sorry." And then in the bottom of the box, under a faded flannel shirt that still held a faint scent of cologne or mildew, or both, was a photograph that made my stomach turn in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Melissa standing in front of this very house, her hand on the red door, wearing a black coat I remembered from our mother's closet, and smiling that small, polite smile she used when she didn't want anyone to know she was panicking inside. I took the box downstairs, placed it on the counter like it might bite me if I wasn't careful, and stared at it while the sun dipped below the neighbor's roofline. My phone buzzed, startling me, and when I saw it was a message from my mom, I nearly ignored it. But something about her timing felt almost uncanny. She wrote, "Your sister's been acting strange. Call me when you can." I didn't call. I got in my car instead, drove to her house, the big, perfect suburban one with the wreath on the door and the seasonal doormat that always made me roll my eyes, and rang the doorbell with more force than was necessary. Dan answered, her husband, wearing that dumb golf polo he always wore like a second skin. And when he saw me standing there, holding a manila envelope full of the more sanitized contents from the attic box, his face went from forced hospitality to genuine concern, faster than I'd ever seen before. "She here?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. He nodded, hesitating. "Upstairs, not feeling well." I stepped inside, and the air was thick with lavender-scented candles and the muffled sound of kids arguing over screen time in the background. I didn't stop to admire the granite countertops or the curated gallery wall in the hallway. I went straight upstairs and found Melissa sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at nothing, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something in. "I found the box," I said simply, holding it out. Her eyes flicked to it and then away. "You went through the attic?" "Wouldn't you?" I replied. She didn't answer. I sat down on the chair across from her and waited, but when it became clear she wasn't going to talk, I pushed the envelope across the bed and said, "I didn't bring all of it, just what I thought you might be willing to explain." Her hand hovered over it, but she didn't touch it. "You want to tell me what happened?" I asked, and I didn't raise my voice or fill the air with accusations. I just waited, like I was waiting for someone I loved to finally let me in. Melissa swallowed hard and said, "I was going to marry him." The sentence landed like a bomb. It was simple, but the way she said it, soft, distant, like it belonged to someone else's life, made me sit back. "He asked me right after I graduated," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I said yes, we even picked a date. I never told Mom or Dad, because I knew they'd talk me out of it. He was intense." "Clearly," I muttered, gesturing toward the photos. "He wasn't always like that," she said quickly, as if trying to protect the version of him she still held on to somewhere. "At first, he was charming, smart, he made me feel like the most important person in the world. But somewhere along the way, he started changing, got paranoid, accused me of things, following me, listening to my phone calls. I tried to leave. He didn't want to let go. And then he vanished," I said, trying to connect the dots. Melissa nodded. "I told him I was done, that I'd met someone else, even though I hadn't, just to push him away. The next day, he was gone. His apartment cleared out, no note, nothing. I thought maybe, I don't know, maybe he hurt himself, or maybe he just finally let go, but I never came back here, not once." I looked at her and saw someone I hadn't seen in years. Not the flawless, sarcastic sister who always seemed to have everything under control, but a woman who had been scared once, maybe more than once, and had buried that fear so deep under shopping trips and PTA meetings that she forgot it was still there. "I didn't buy this house to hurt you," I said finally. "I didn't know." "I know," she replied, But you did. We sat in silence for a long time after that, and when I finally got up to leave, she didn't stop me. But as I drove home, a thought clung to the edges of my mind like static. If Shawn had left, really left, then who wrote the note I'd found yesterday in the mailbox, addressed only to the owner, with the words scrawled in sharp, jagged handwriting that sent chills up my spine? I'm coming back for what's mine. And for the first time since I'd held those keys, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what or who that meant. By the time the first frost settled over the lawn like a faded memory of snow, clinging to the overgrown hedges and tracing the corners of the windows in silvery fingers, the house had started to feel almost normal. Normal in the way that something familiar becomes less sharp over time, not because you understand it more, but because your brain, in its infinite wisdom, begins the slow process of numbing you to the things it can't make sense of. I painted the guest room a soft cream, filled the kitchen cabinets with secondhand dishware that didn't match but somehow belonged together, and lined the hallway with framed photos of things that had nothing to do with the past. Sunsets, flowers, places I hadn't been yet. I even let myself listen to music again while I unpacked, which I hadn't done in months, because for a while, every sound reminded me of footsteps I hadn't heard and voices I didn't recognize. Still, there were nights when the wind pressed too hard against the windows, and I could swear I heard something creak upstairs, even though the attic had been empty since the day I cleared out the last box. And there were mornings when the front gate, never quite secure, always slightly ajar, would be swinging wide open despite the fact that I swore I'd locked it the night before. I told myself it was the weather, the way the old house shifted with the seasons, wood expanding and contracting like lungs. I told myself stories, because sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are the only things that keep us from falling through the cracks. But I never stopped thinking about the note, the one left in my mailbox, sealed in an envelope without a stamp, without a name, just those 8 words scribbled in a hand that trembled but didn't hesitate. I'm coming back for what's mine. I'd tucked it into the back of my kitchen drawer, under the warranty for the water heater and the takeout menus from local pizza places, pretending it wasn't there, even though I found myself opening that drawer at least once a day just to make sure it hadn't moved, hadn't disappeared, hadn't multiplied. I didn't tell Melissa about it. I didn't tell anyone, not even Uncle Mitch, who had come by once more with a 6-pack and a vague warning that sometimes ghosts aren't the dead kind. Thanksgiving came again faster than I expected, as it always does when your days are packed with enough tasks to distract you from the weight of unfinished business. This time, I offered to host, half as a gesture of goodwill, half as a challenge to see who would show up and under what pretense. Mom accepted without hesitation, her tone bright and carefully neutral, like she'd made some kind of silent peace with the previous year's disruption. Mitch was the first to RSVP, of course, texting me, "Free food? I'll be there in jeans," followed by something that may have been a turkey emoji if he'd known how to use them. Dan and the kids replied through Melissa, and Melissa, for all her silence over the past few months, sent a message that simply said, "I'll come, but I won't talk about it." I didn't ask her to. The day of, the house smelled like roasted garlic and baked apples, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe that maybe things had moved on, that maybe we all had. Melissa arrived first, surprisingly, and when she walked through the red door with a bottle of wine and a wary glance at the hallway, I could see that she wasn't there to make a scene. She was there because something inside her refused to let that house, our house now, become a symbol of fear. She didn't comment on the furniture, didn't criticize the wallpaper, didn't even flinch when I handed her a glass and said, "It's store-bought pie this year. I'm not that domestic." The dinner passed in polite conversation and shared glances, the kind of forced small talk that happens when a room is full of people who remember too much but aren't quite ready to say it out loud. It wasn't until dessert, when the kids had gone off to the living room and Mom was flipping through a photo album from the 90s, that Uncle Mitch leaned in across the table and said something that froze the cranberry sauce on my tongue. "Shawn Becker's dead." I looked at him, my hand tightening around my glass without meaning to, and said nothing. "They found him," he continued, voice low. About 2 weeks ago in a rest stop bathroom off Route 46. No ID, but they ran the prints. Been dead at least 2 days before they found him. Overdose, they think. Quiet. Melissa looked up then, not shocked but hollow, like a window that no longer held a view, just reflected whatever light hit it. How long had he been back? I asked, not sure if I wanted an answer. Mitch shrugged. Hard to say, maybe he never left. Maybe he just kept to the corners waiting. But if he left that note, he trailed off, letting the thought hang like smoke. After everyone left, after the dishes were washed and the folding chairs were stowed away, and the quiet crept in like a final guest refusing to leave, I found myself drawn to the attic again. I don't know what I expected to find. Another box, a fresh note, maybe some new shadow in the corner that hadn't been there before. But instead I just stood in the center of the floor, staring at the beams above my head, listening to the silence that had at some point become my only constant. And then, just as I was about to turn away, something caught my eye, something tucked between the floorboards beneath where the box had been. I crouched down, pried it loose, and pulled out a single photograph. This one wasn't dated, wasn't numbered, and hadn't been placed with the others. It was newer, printed on glossy paper that hadn't yet faded. It was a photo of Melissa, and in it she was holding a key. My key, the one shaped like a cardinal. My breath caught, and I felt that old chill creep up my spine again. Not sharp and sudden this time, but slow and familiar, like the return of an old ache you thought had healed. So no, I don't live in that tiny apartment anymore. I don't haul myself up 3 flights of stairs after working 2 jobs. And I don't lie awake listening to someone else's music through paper-thin walls. I live in a house now, a house I bought with my own sweat and silence, with all the years I spent holding my tongue and letting someone else own the narrative. But I also live with something else, something that came with the house, something that doesn't leave even when the lights go out. And some nights, when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear footsteps that aren't mine. Not loud, just familiar,